Hello and welcome to the UChicago Alumni Association Career Month webinar series. My name is Rachel Burkhan-Rommelfinger and I work with the Alumni Career Development Team here at the University of Chicago in Hyde Park. And I am delighted to welcome you to the webinar, Job Search Success in Your 40s, 50s, and Beyond. This webinar is going to talk to us today about how you individually present yourself during your job search in the face of ageism, but you can join us later this week on Wednesday for a webinar on how to build a diverse and inclusive workplace. Today's speaker is Anne Marie Segal, who holds a master's degree from 1996 from the university. She is an executive coach, an author, and a former practicing attorney. She's also a former 15-year-old ice cream scooper who got fired from her job when she tried to tell the owner of the ice cream shop how to run the business. Today, her business advice is much more favorably received by those she works with. And before I hand the controls over to Anne Marie, I would like to ask you all to answer this poll really quickly for us, which is, what is your age? So if you'll please take a moment to fill out this poll, selecting which range fits your age range, just so we get an idea of who's on here today. All right, and you can all see the results. And with that, I'm going to hand the controls over to Anne Marie to present for us.
Hey, Rachel. Hi. So I'm looking at the answers. 50 to 59 seems to be our highest, and next is 40 to 49 at the moment. And my attempt to be able to see myself has disappeared, so you can all see me, hopefully. There we go. Ageism or not, I'm Anne Marie Segal. Welcome, everyone. Ageism or not, job search success in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. Today, that is our topic. And as I was just saying, it sounds like many of you, at least that have joined already, are in your 50s. So that's good to know for us to have some background today. And we'll start right here with this first slide, ageism or not. So if you track statistics, and I know a number of people really do, there are many more older workers in the workforce today. However, as you all know, that's why you're on the seminar, there is also the prejudice against older workers that persists. And so today what we're doing is not actually learning to advocate in general against ageism. I want to be very clear about that. We're learning to change what we're doing, our methodology, our strategy, our implementation, execution, whatever words resonate with you about your job search, so individually. And in addition to the poll Rachel sent out, there were two more questions I wanted to ask people, again, to get a sense of, you know, who's in our audience today. So where are you from? And a word or two about where you are in your career or what your career is. You know, if you're, for example, an attorney like I was, or some other profession, if you can type that into your chat box a bit later, I'll have those answers. So as I said, we're, you know, the bottom of this slide, and I don't like to read through slides, you can all read them yourselves, but at the bottom of the slide, this really clarifies what we're talking about today. Ageism or not, what can you do to achieve better results now? In any job search, of course, there is this issue of, are they seeing me for who I am, or have they typecast me? And the picture illustrates completely this point. Everyone has something against them. Everyone has something that the rest of the world might see as leading rather than them as an individual. And I want to put this in this context because mindset is so important in your job search. If you get caught up in what other people are thinking of you based on some pre-impression, and you're not there to make your own impression on the interviewer, you're going to have a hard time. So breaking down your mindset is a really important piece here, and we'll spend more time talking about that. And again, on the bottom of this slide, who is your audience? What can you offer that they need? Why should they hire you? If you've read or seen my book, Master the Interview, I talk about this over and over. And if you've worked with me as a client, you know I go through this point over and over again. Every question, whether it's when someone's reading your resume, and a resume is kind of an answer before the question. You know, it turns it around. It presents who you are, your LinkedIn profile, interviewing, emails, any contact you might have with your audience in a job search. The ultimate question they're asking is, why should I hire you? So if you can keep that in mind, if you can frame everything you do in that way, and it's not that it's all sales, right? But it's a brand. If you're familiar with that term, personal branding, we are branding ourselves to explain, why should you hire me? Because as we all know, if it was not work, we wouldn't get paid, and no one owes us a job. And so because of that, we need to attract the right audience. And so we'll go through now some more details about how to do that. Rachel, do we have any answers back on?
We do.
Right.
We have folks a lot from Chicago, from St. Louis, Colorado, California, New York, Montreal, as far away as Uruguay, joining us today. People range in careers. We have quite a few attorneys that are on, former math teacher, editor, marketing officers, nonprofit professionals in fundraising, public relations, journalists, molecular biology PhD, who's taught college, chemical engineer, nonprofit executives. So quite diverse, and people are still writing in from Los Angeles and Houston, San Francisco, entrepreneurs. So quite a variety of folks. Former investment banker.
Got it. Okay. So what I'm hearing is there's some attorney, financial services, there's the nonprofit piece, media and journalism. Then there's some people who are coming in and saying former something, which might mean that they're what's sometimes called rebounders, people coming back to the workforce. And I want to draw their attention. Rachel, do they have the full set of slides yet? Is it available, or will they get it at the end?
It is available in the handout section. So if you have your control panel, you can download the slides in the handouts, and they'll be emailed to you after.
Great. So if you're a rebounder and you're on this seminar specifically about that, and I don't want you to be on for a while and say, oh, we're not really specifically talking about that. Two things in that regard. One is the lessons that we're covering today are applicable to everyone. They're specifically tailored towards older workers, but they're applicable to everyone, including people who are coming back to the workforce. And also, I have an HBR podcast that I refer to in the resources slide at the end. It's about career change, and there's an example of someone coming back to the workforce. A lot of it is confidence building, learning how to position your skills in the right way. So again, that's something applicable to everyone, but I wanted to make that reference. So again, so we start here with the summary. And again, mindset is really the most important thing. For someone who's, for example, trying to think of a new career, rather than just going out there, because a lot of my stuff is just let's go and get going and get started on it. I want to make sure that if you're thinking about changing careers, that you first spend the time to package that for yourself. If you're going on informational interviews, you don't want to go out and say, I'm so confused, I don't know what I want to do. Another line I have in one of my books is, you're not confused, you're undecided. So I assume that will resonate with some people. I say that a lot to clients, and that goes to mindset. Research and presentation, and we'll talk about that further, your professional network. And I say create, build, maintain, and reconnect. I want to emphasize here that reconnection is very important. And if you are on a bit of a hiatus, or you're considering a job search in 6 to 12 months from now, reconnecting now is a really great idea, because you want to be able to have that network built out before you need it. And you don't want to suddenly, after you haven't talked to someone in a long time, come while you're looking for a job. It's much better to have that relationship in place. and what I call pay into your network. So in other words, you want to show and genuinely, authentically, not just because it's leverage later for your job search, but you want to show an interest in your network as well, not just what your network can do for you. And we'll talk about that a bit later. LinkedIn, again, we'll have a couple of discussions about LinkedIn further along, and then methodology and timing. And I say again here, start early, be consistent. Even if you have something come up in our lives, and many of us do as executives, we get very busy with fire drills, or at this age in our lives, aging parents or child issues or different things. Be consistent. Even if you can't devote the same amount of time to your job search, don't let it drop off the map. Continue to put some time into it every week. Even if you have to budget it, make sure it's in your calendar. I say to people, sometimes even a half hour a week, you can get a lot of emails out, or you can do an intro call with someone. There's a lot that you can get done without just stopping, because once you stop, you get out of the momentum, and you also, you lose a lot of time, and you end up having to restart again. And as we probably all know, starting is the hardest part. Nail your messaging, we'll talk about that more, and obviously the solution-oriented approach, that again goes to mindset. So we'll start with some preconceptions or misconceptions about older workers. And I think, Rachel, you might have had a poll for this as well.
Yeah, you should all be able to see a list of some misconceptions, some biases, and you can select all the ones here that apply to you.
And while you're all taking this poll, I'm gonna, oh, my webcam disappeared again. Can you pop that back up, Rachel? And I'm gonna go through this slide. It's easier to talk to the camera when I see myself, but hopefully she can pop that back up. Warm up some, sorry, biases re older workers. And I have this time to upgrade with the typewriter. I know we don't all use typewriters anymore, but the preconception I think that I see more and more is the lack of technical skills. And it's a shame, because honestly, technical skills are in some ways the easiest to acquire. One of the things I say over and over again to clients when they say, I don't know X, whatever X is. I have one client who said, well, I think German would be really helpful, and I'm kind of rusty in my German. So, well, hire a tutor or go to well, they call it Stammtisch, go to a language table. Find a way to get that skill back up if it's going to be very important to your career. Same with technology. If there's something that you need to learn because you've either been out of the workforce or you've just kind of let it go and the field has progressed without you, so to speak, find some time to do that. I find that when we have those things that we're working on, we don't have as much time to be worried. If we're spending time thinking about our job search and lamenting about our job search and spinning our wheels about our job search, and going online and applying to every job that's out there in what many of us call, not so affectionately, the black hole, meaning you're just submitting resumes to online jobs, your mindset is going to suffer. And so put that energy into something more productive. For example, finding a way to get out of these common biases. So Rachel, what did we get back as far as the poll? Too expensive. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Well, I was going to say, you can see that the number one is too expensive at 66%, followed by lacking current skills or out of touch at 41%, and 33% being told they're not committed enough. And some folks wrote in some additional comments in the questions, and a lot of them were, intimidating because they were too experienced. One person, they're told they were not serious about the job because they had children. They're too devoted to their children. And I think many of these repeated, that they're worth too much. They'd be too expensive to take on.
It would be interesting to know if people have another opportunity to write in the chat box. when you're told that you're too expensive, and another word that's used is overqualified, what actually happens in that moment? So what are you qualified for, and what are you going for? And so a lot of these times we really need to drill down to what the mismatch actually is. Sometimes, for example, you've been a really heavy hitter in your career for a number of years, and now all of a sudden you find you need to take a bit of a plateau, and you need to know how to explain that without sounding like another bias that you're not committed. And these answers you have to massage, you have to get them down to 2 or 3 sentences, and then you have to read the room to some degree when you're in the interview. Because, and I'll get to this in another slide in a bit more detail, I can sit and tell you in an interview prep, or we can talk here about this webinar, what it is that you need to say in an interview, but it's not going to be effective unless it's targeted to your specific audience. And I don't just mean your audience is a nonprofit executive. Your audience is the specific person that you're talking to. And on that same point, I want to make sure to say, since it's related, don't get drawn into being friends with the interviewer, right? Often we know people that are interviewing us, or we have people in common. The person who wrote in about the kids, if you talk about your children a lot in the interview, then unfortunately, it's highly likely that people will think you're more concerned about your children than the job. The interviews I've had or given or prepped for where I've seen people get sidetracked like that, and it's funny, I have a good friend who's actually on an interview right now, a lunch interview, and she said to me, what do I need to worry about? I said, don't order anything messy, number one. You have to really make sure that you're, again, focused on that same question, why should I hire you? So if they ask you about your kids, that's great, and you can talk about them, and you shouldn't be, oh, I'm not going to talk about my kids. If there's that connection already, or there's some I wouldn't necessarily offer it unless it's a really integral part of the story. Like you have a long gap, but make sure that you always have that question in mind. Why should I hire you? So if we go now to the next slide, the warm-up exercises. So I have all these biases here, and now I've gone through one in particular, and the bias is that you're not flexible enough. So with older workers, the out of touch is similar in the same way. The out of touch being that, you've kind of got your idea of how things go and you don't really know how the world has progressed without you. Here are some ways to think about it. You want to show that you're versatile. You want to show that you're inclusive and open to new ideas. Inclusive also means diversity, right? That's another idea about older workers sometimes, that they don't understand the modern workplace. They are not really engaged with millennials. So all the different ways that diversity could be expressed. And as I say here at the top, actually both of these first two lead-ins, you don't want to be trying to say, okay, well, maybe a younger worker might offer X, but I offer Y, and Y is my experience. I say X and Y, I can't help it, I'm an attorney. You don't want to be hammering about your experience if in fact they're already impressed with your experience, but they need to know that you tick these other boxes, if you will. So that's what you want to be thinking about in the interview. Not just what you think is your greatest value proposition, another word I use a lot with clients, the value that you add, but also what do they value and where's the intersection of those two things? That's really where we need to get to. Also, for older workers with ageism possibly being an issue, or maybe you've faced it in your career, you need to choose enlightened audiences. And by that, I mean ones who are receptive to someone with your bio, your package, your brand. So there are, and Rachel and I were talking last week as we were finalizing the slides. At the end in the resource section, there's a link, I believe it's an AARP link to, and if you're not from the US, that's Association of something retired people, American maybe is in there, AARP. That's something essentially for older people, and there's a section on employment there. So there's a link there to major employers who might be open to older workers. I went through some of the companies, and many of them are in healthcare, for example. It's not necessarily the only guide. Also, you can be thinking about smaller employers, or essentially what you're looking for is an employer who can look through the box that many people place different candidates in and really look to you individually as a candidate. And so the companies that are committed to that are the smaller companies where they're looking for a longer term fit. They don't want as much turnover. They don't have as many employees, and it's really behooves them to choose the person and not the resume, so to speak. That might be a better fit. And so I give you some options here, some ideas. When we talk about targets, we're talking about employment, consulting, corporate boards. Someone on the call, someone on the chat box said they're an entrepreneur. I do want to say here, everything we're talking about the why should I hire you does translate into entrepreneurship. A side hustle, if you're not familiar with that term, one of the things you can do to try to transition is stay in your current job and find a way to do something else on the side. It doesn't necessarily have to be paid. It could be volunteer. For example, if I have people trying to get onto boards, I often say, if you have a passion and devotion to a nonprofit and can get on their board, that's a good step. For someone who's trying to move from one field to another, or women or men, frankly, trying to get back into the workforce for whatever reason, you can volunteer if you know you're going to have a gap, you can volunteer, or when you're trying to build up your skills, you can volunteer, if in fact that's financially viable for you. What I would suggest with any of those things is really think about, again, what your audience wants. It's not the fact of volunteering or the fact of the side hustle. It's trying to take, you're in one vertical and you're trying to move to a new vertical and be able to have your target see you in that light. And so you're essentially finding not necessarily baby steps, but ways to move closer to your ultimate target. And sometimes you don't know what that target is. And as I said earlier, you're undecided, not confused, but you can have a couple of different things that you do while you're in your current job, experiments, little experiments that you're running to figure that out. And then there are obviously fellowships and programs, maybe not obviously if you haven't heard of this, there are fellowships and programs that large employers and others offer that essentially are there to get people back to work. They understand there's a talent pool that we're missing, and they want to make sure to do their part to help get that. And often they'll hire you afterwards. Sometimes another employer will hire you after you've been through that program. Don't discount those programs. I have a lot of clients who've gotten a lot of good work in the programs and good positions afterwards. And the last two things I want to say are this. I have leverage and value your skills and match your individual passions, needs, and values. The second one's very important. If you are not passionate about what you're doing, if the values of the target don't match you, your own values, it won't be a good fit. And in addition, you want to be investing your time well. And what I mean by that is not just spinning your wheels trying to do a job search, but really figuring out what it is that you want and going out to get it. So now we're going to get into some of the meat here. And what I decided to do is I have 7 different scenarios. These are examples that I hear from clients. The reason I set up the presentation this way is I don't want to just keep throwing ideas at you. I'd like to walk through some scenarios to really give you a sense of how this works. So Rachel, I think you might have yet another poll.
Yeah, you all can see question, which of these speaks most to you? So please select one of the options: experience not valued, or seeing too many gaps, ignoring your strengths, multiple interviews and no offer, sending many resumes but getting no bites, unhelpful network, or delicate, challenging interview questions. Which of these have you experienced?
Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes, they can still hear you.
Great. Okay, so while you're going through the poll, so these are the actual words that I hear from people. These are the feedback that I get from clients after interviews. So the poll essentially is, which type of feedback have you gotten the most? Rachel and I were, Rachel does this, and I want to give a plug here for Rachel and her colleagues, Adam as well, and others in the career office. If you're an alumni, reach out to them, because I spoke to Rachel for, I guess, a good hour on Friday, and she really understands this stuff. She really understands how to present yourself as a candidate, and she and I went through a lot of this in advance to figure out what we expected you all would say. I don't have the results of the poll yet, but we said that Unhelpful Network was, it may or may not be the words that speak to you, but was often what people found were a problem. So let's see if that's actually right. Unhelpful Network, oh gosh, it was low. Okay, so many resumes sent, no bites. Multiple interviews, no offer. Experience not valued. Those are the, well, it's the second and third in different order. Those are the top three. I have a feeling that people aren't networking enough. They're not understanding the point of their network. It may be why they think their network is unhelpful, or we may have been not anticipating the other answers, but we can go through this a bit more. So let's go through number one here. Sorry, this is just my short list, and I want to work through the examples. I left this here. What I did is I left this here so that if you're looking at the slides later and you want to think about these answers for these questions and answers for yourself, you can refer back to it. So the first one, experience not valued. This was, Rachel, this wasn't one of the ones that people said were the most, right? The ones that people had were multiple interviews, no offer, multiple resumes, no bites, and
Experience not valued is pretty high.
Yeah, these three. Okay, so let's speak to those the most. Okay, great. So experience not valued. And this to some degree goes to what people were putting in the poll at the beginning about essentially being overqualified or too expensive. So these are the questions that you want to ask yourself. And what this is essentially a reality check for people who are going through the interview process, and a way to calm your nerves. And third of all, a way to, I call this metacognition. It's essentially when you're stepping outside of yourself. The best way to think about how to present yourself in an interview is you're not the person who is being interviewed. You're not the interviewer, but you're a third party here who's watching that interaction. I think Seth Godin is the person I quoted in my book about that with Master the Interview. You're thinking about, what would the third party sitting here think of this interaction? And if you're ever on a panel interview, you have that going on, right? You're speaking to one individual and there's other people who are watching your reaction. So this is essentially an exercise, these 7 points, and going through, ask yourself, an exercise in trying to get that metacognition, trying to understand how you're coming across and where the mismatch might be, so that you can be more effective in your job search and your interviewing, in presenting yourself in your resume, etc. So the first thing when your experience is not valued is, do you have the right experience for the role? And are you communicating it? Are you communicating your value proposition and results achieved? So I'll just give you a quick example. If you have a resume, I have done a couple of board resumes lately, so that's on my mind. If you have a resume that's set up to be an executive, and you're looking for executive roles, and now you want to go onto a board, you flip your resume so that the information that's relevant to a corporate board would be first, and then the rest of the resume comes after. Or say you're in media and say you were in media, you became an attorney, and now you want to get back to media, for example. You have to find a way to get that media experience up to the top. You maybe mention it in your summary. You give some sense about you. If you've done recent volunteer or paid work related to that, that would have to go up at the top. We call the top third of the resume prime real estate. Same thing in an interview. When you're asked questions like, tell me about a time when, or tell me about a challenge you faced, or tell me about yourself. You want to answer in the context of, I mean, as long as it's not too dated, sometimes it's an issue, but you want to answer in the context of letting them see you in the role. Again, every question is, why should I hire you? Again, with mindset, are you taking it personally? So that's point number 3 here. Negativity doesn't sell. If you don't remember anything else from what I've said today, those 3 words you should remember. Negativity doesn't sell. So if you're going on interviews and not getting bites, if you feel that your experience isn't valued, etc., you have to remember, pull yourself out of it. That's why we have these questions. Don't get into a rut thinking, okay, here's another interview, I'm going to go on another one, and I'm not going to get it again. It doesn't do you any good. And the last is that idea, the same as I talked about before about being versatile. Sorry, my clock is off. There it is. Selling yourself on what they're looking to buy. So selling yourself on experience when the organization values something else, or as I said in an earlier slide, they already know you have the experience. That's not what's at issue. That's not what you should be selling yourself on. Same with the multiple interviews. A lot of these points that I'm raising are similar, so I'm going to start to go through them a bit more quickly, but you'll start to see thematically what we're doing here. Would any of the jobs been a good match for you? That's similar to the question on this previous slide. Do you need more interview practice? Do you know how to present yourself properly? Do you know how to give yourself the right place in the interview that you're sitting up straight? I notice I'm not as I'm saying that. Sometimes people do this before an interview, you know, this kind of power pose and getting themselves ready for it. How is your energy level on those days? Same point. What red flags emerged in the interview? Maybe you find as you're in that interview, it is not a good match for you. Maybe you found as you were in the interview that your energy changed when you figured that out. That's okay. That doesn't mean you did something wrong. You need to observe that and take from it something that will help you in the next interview. And then who else was in the running? Again, that's a reality check. If you are not getting jobs, but they're promoting internal candidates, or, you know, somehow the competition was very fierce, I would note that for myself rather than just chalk it up to, you know, ageism or some other issue, or that they just didn't like you, or that you're not good at interviews. I mean, there's a really easy way to get into that rut, as I said, and that's what we're trying to get out of. Many resumes sent and no bites. This again is the same point about telling the right story in your resume. Making sure that you're not sending into the black hole, as I said earlier. And that goes to your network. People who are 40 and over, and I know most of the people in this audience, they said we're in the range of 50s, at least when we first got started on this presentation. Your network is so important. People who will vouch for you, because there is a bias. If someone's 20 years old with 40 years of experience, as you know, they say, and cheaper, and maybe they think they have more energy, they know more tech, whatever the biases are. If you have someone on the inside who says, I know that person, she's very good, she will do it better than anyone else has ever done it in that role, that is so different than just sending your resume across, even with the best cover letter that you can draft, and hoping for the best. Again, on the branding piece, does your LinkedIn profile tell the same story that your resume does, and that's coming out of your mouth, so to speak, in the interview? Are you articulating the same narrative in all 3 spots and every platform? This is just also something to say on the side about your reputation on the internet. It's not just LinkedIn, but where on social media and where else have you been? What kind of digital footprint have you left? And does it correspond to what you are now? Now, that doesn't mean you can't change fields, but it does mean that it has to make sense. right? The interviewer has to understand. When I moved from being an attorney to being a coach, obviously there's a lot out there about me as an attorney, but I needed to rebrand all the different pieces of me. Now I'm a former practicing attorney. I got that word from an attorney who said you never stop being an attorney. So you can't really be a former attorney. And so that became part of my brand because I realized the value of that. Last one, is your voicemail full? Did you check your spam folder? There are very, very highly intelligent people who do not have their voicemail box set up or have too many voicemails and you can't get through. So if you're not getting a call back, think about that as well. Unhelpful network. Your network is your net worth, as they say. And so in order to really leverage your network, you need to be thinking about all these points. Have you told your network what you want? You don't just want a job. There's specifics that you need to give them so they can actually be helpful. Do they have the motivation to help you? Are they able to help you? Are they in the right position? Are you credible? So, you know, if all you do is go out and drink on the weekends with someone and they never know anything about you professionally, there's no way that they can actually credibly suggest that you're the right candidate. So you want to be thinking about that. That doesn't mean to become stiff and professional all the time. It just means that you need to consider the messaging that you're presenting. Same with a board. If you're on a nonprofit board and you decide that you want to try to reach out to some of the board members and think about the point right below. You're investing in your network, not a one-way street. It's not like you've just been on the board with people and now, oh, somebody needs to get me a job. I had someone want to become a client. It was like, nobody wants to get a job for me. Nobody wants to help me. And the question, of course, is, well, are you just expecting people to do things for you, or is it actually a relationship? If it's transactional, it's not going to work. But say you're going out to people on the board. If they've only seen you in board meetings and not talking and not contributing anything, or if they've seen you never raise your hand for projects, that will reflect on you as a candidate. So what it means to have a good network isn't just knowing a lot of people. I put the picture up of all these different individuals because, and I can't put all the pictures up, I'd love to, but I'd love to have one where the people are actually interacting with each other. People are actually being helpful to each other. It's not just how many people you know or how well placed they are. What are the relationships that you have with those individuals? What kind of back and forth is there? And can you build out your network even more? If there's someone that you need to get to know, how can you get to them? How can you figure out a way to make them part of your network? I'm going to skip this slide to some degree, just talk about it for a few seconds because this wasn't a big one, and I want to make sure to get to the other points. But anytime that you have an interviewer who doesn't seem to be giving you the time of day, again, put this in the context of the situation. Seeing only gaps, ignoring the strengths. This is kind of the opposite of the having too much experience. I always say that, you know, there's weaknesses and strengths and they're kind of flipped from each other. So sometimes people have a lot of generalized experience, they're not specialized enough. Sometimes people have too much experience, sometimes they don't seem to have enough. And you're always just trying to, see the bold text here, not self-sabotage, really just figure out how to close the gap or how to present yourself effectively. The delicate and challenging questions. So people didn't list this, but again, it may not have been obvious from the beginning what's going on here, which is a list of ideas. This I find is a huge stumbling block for clients. Delicate and challenging questions. The one I had up at the top was, you know, everything was going great until they asked me why I left my last job. It may be for return to work folks, everything was going great until they asked me what I've been doing in the interim. And so your reason for leaving, I have another slide on that next. You really have to have that polished. Any other questions that would give you pause, you really have to have them polished. What I mean by polished is if it's a question that's going to potentially elicit a negative response, for example, if you were fired from a job, what you need to do is kind of get everything out there for yourself beforehand. I say, put it all on paper, for example. I also like, and I use these a lot in my coaching practice, they make these really, really big Post-it notes, or you can get a whiteboard that's just a piece that you stick on the wall. You don't have to nail it in or anything. It's just very thin. It's a roll, and you put it on the wall, or the big Post-it notes, and you write it all for yourself. So, why was I fired from my last job? Okay, well, I did all these things wrong. My boss was this horrible person, blah, 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 blah. Get all that crap, if you will, out, all that negativity out, and then think about, okay, what of the pieces that I wrote, what's true? Every answer has to be authentic or it doesn't work. And then how can I put this into a credible answer? How can I boil it down to 1 or 2 sentences? And then, and this sounds kind of like a used car salesman, but I'm going to say it anyway, then you got to give it the spin, right? And I'll go to this in this next slide. Go all the way down to the bottom here. Then move to, and this rule excites me or is a great fit because. That's the spin. So it's not that you're spinning your answer, you're pivoting to the next piece, that why should you hire me, right? So maybe the reason that it didn't work out at your last job is because you couldn't actually advance, whether you were fired or not, but you kind of learned, as I say here with this client, this is from an actual coaching conversation, learned everything she needed to learn, and she was given, bullet point 4, a chance to choose another role, or choose a package or choose another role. So she's kind of gonna narrow this down. This was the stuff you might put on the wall. Narrow this down, reading the room, reading her audience, so figuring out what's applicable to them, and then 1 or 2 sentences of a response. And she's gonna spin it. Now, so that's what I'm looking for in this new role. Now, if she knows the new role isn't gonna give a lot of advancement, that's not the right spin. But she's gotta match that to the question, and match it also to herself. Rachel,
Anne Marie, I just want to give you a note that we're about 12:44.
Okay, so I'll try to go through these last slides quickly. I knew I might not get a lot of time, but I wanted to put them in so you had a chance to read them after. LinkedIn, you've got to be on LinkedIn unless there's really a reason not to be in your personal situation. LinkedIn is the most powerful tool. They're trying to ramp it up. I don't think it will ever replace the resume, but in some cases, in some accelerated job searches, it can. They're making the profiles look a lot more like resumes. And companies are integrating their ATS with LinkedIn. So they're finding you right away, and what they've done is make the algorithmic searches and the stuff that comes out on the other end, and I'm not a techie, but they're able to sort things a lot better so that they're able to get the information about candidates properly and make better decisions based on that information. So it's really important not just to have a LinkedIn profile, but to have the right information in it. I wanted to make sure to say that, especially for older candidates. Here again, I want you to be thinking about all these points in general and what you can do for each one. And today, how can you be more purposeful? So what we've talked about, where can you take that and what can you leave behind? Negativity is obviously one point. Maybe you want to write for yourself right now, write down for yourself what else you've learned that you could leave behind based on the answers you've given. And then what will you do today, next week, next month? If you can start to plan this out, you make the plan and you work the plan. I always say it's like project management of your own career. I didn't hear any project managers on the call, but to some degree we all need to be. I'm planning Thanksgiving for 16 people. It's like a project management, a project to manage. So think about your career that same way. And these are the further resources. Here's some information about me. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And Rachel, do you want to have some questions? Open it for questions?
I think that would be great. We've already had a few come in. One question is, I feel you've talked a lot about branding, and my resume doesn't feel like it supports the narrative for the jobs that I want.
Okay.
But I do feel like I've attempted to rebrand myself. What tips or advice could you give me?
Right. Okay. So the person is saying they have a resume, maybe it's dated, it's not working for the new roles. So the first tip I would say, again, this is something I do with clients, and I talked about, putting this on the wall. I like it on the wall because if you're writing it on a piece of paper, I talked about the power pose. There's something about writing it on the wall that's more expansive and thinking creatively, and it feels more like a brainstorming session as opposed to trying to keep everything tight. So put up your wall, put up your career story, put up, your value proposition, so what you offer, put up your target audience and what they need. The same things we were talking about here. Figure out what your story is and how it fits the new audience. Probably your resume doesn't work because you haven't thought enough about the audience. Or if you have, you haven't worked it in. You put all this up, on the wall or somewhere else, and then you go to the resume and you take that narrative and work it in. And then the same with the other pieces that you're looking at, or the platforms, if you will. And then when you do interview prep, it's the same idea. So you're thinking about your value prop and giving it to your audience. Everything that comes out of your mouth should match the story that's on the resume. The resume is like the appetizer if they get it first. It helps them ask you the right questions. So you want to make sure that everything on there is a good lead-in for what you're going to want to talk about in the interview. I hope that's helpful.
Two other questions have come in that are, they've been leaving their education dates off their resume, but everyone keeps specifically asking me about my education dates and also specifically asking me for salary numbers at the beginning of interviews.
So yeah, the education date question. Every client I work with has to make their own decision about it. Frankly, some people are too young, they feel. Many people feel that, anything earlier than 1990, they don't want to put on their resume. Because I have clients who both recruit and are out there, I get to hear both sides, because obviously a lot of the time, my clients are also reading many, many resumes. I have one client who said to me, if there's no education on the dates on the resume, I just throw it in the garbage or recycling. I don't even look at it. I mean, she probably just puts it in the no category, doesn't even print it, right, on her email. But the idea is, there are some people who are going to discount you. There are some people who are going to ask you. I have one client who said they asked her, from jobs that were over 15 years old, well, why did you go from this job to this job? And why did you leave this job? And why did you leave this job? You don't know who your audience is going to be. And so you need to just make a decision. And I'm answering this question in a longer way because it really goes to the heart of the branding piece. Decide what feels right to you. I always say it's like you're putting on your own Armani suit or something. Which I would not feel comfortable in, but whatever that is for you, your equivalent, right? Your resume should be the kind of car you want to drive, so to speak, the suit you'd want to wear. If you're more comfortable with dates, go for it. If you feel that dates are not being, putting the dates on there is not helpful, then I would take them off. Some people don't put them on the resume, but they do put them on LinkedIn. And that's a softer way to make the dates get across, but their hope is the resume will come first, the person will be interested, and by the time they get to LinkedIn, well, they're already invested, they've spent the time looking up the LinkedIn profile, now they have the information they wanted, but if it had been there in the first place, they might not have taken a second look.
Another question is, what would you suggest doing if you'd like to transition to a position that requires different experience that's often significant? So for example, they said, I've been told that there was a concern that I have been more senior in other roles, and why would I want to transition to a junior position in this different field?
And the question goes to how to answer that in an interview. What specifically did they?
I think yeah, I guess in the interview, how do they address this concern about their experience?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so it's hard sometimes to be credible when you want to make that change, especially if you're taking a step down. One of the things that you need to do is obviously sound very excited about the new role, but not only that, you need to build yourself a deep enough understanding of what you're getting into so that someone knows you're not just taking a leap of faith. So I'll give you an example. When I decided to become a coach, I was a partner of a local law firm in Stanford, and I couldn't take clients, paid clients, at the same time, obviously, because that I would see that as a conflict of interest, as probably anyone would. But I did take the coach training, and I did speak to other coaches who had been doing it for a long time. And I even got to sit in on a couple of client meetings with attorney clients. And I did some pro bono coaching from my own network. And so I built that whole piece out before I ever gave notice that I was leaving, and before I decided to launch my new practice. And the reason I did that is because I knew the first question with clients would be, so how do I know you actually know what you're doing, right? It's the same thing here. If you're going into a new field, I know your question was more specific to making less money, and that's just one piece of it. But honestly, these are all complex things that we need to unpack. And so their hesitation that you don't want to step down might be also you don't really know what you're getting into, and you're going to be paid less, and how do I know you're even going to enjoy it? So I would try to make sure that piece is covered. And then you've got to talk about the fact that, okay, so I'm 50, I imagine working for another 15 or 20 years. So I see this as an investment. That's how I would specifically answer that piece. I see this as an investment in my career. I'm not expecting that in 2 or 3 years or even 5, I might get up to what I was making before, if that's actually the case. But for example, you might say my old career was so stressful, frankly, it wasn't worth it. I would rather focus, my values have shifted. I would rather focus on a career that I can make a meaningful contribution or whatever the answer is, and not just to make money. Not that anybody's ever made enough money, but I've gone after that goal, and that's just not my motivator right now.
That's wonderful. And Maria, I would just want to say, I also hear you're saying that also should be part of the brand that might be on LinkedIn
Mm-hmm.
or in our cover letter or resume. So even before the interview, you can kind of address some of that by making the pitch for why you want to make this change.
Exactly.
One other question that's been coming up is people are struggling, saying that this network being unhelpful, if they feel like they know no one that could be of use to them, what are some tips of how they might expand their network and connect to some new people?
So it depends on what field you're in, but the general answer I always give is fish where the fish are. And what that means more specifically is figure out there's 2 pools of people you want to get to, right? There's the ultimate targets, and then there are the ultimate targets, and then there are the connectors. So the ultimate targets are, for example, the hiring manager of a role that might be the right role for you. And the connector is the person who can get you there. So you're looking to fish where the fish are for both of those people. So where do they hang out? What do they do? I can't tell you whether that means to join a yacht club or join a church or connect to them on LinkedIn or go to a conference or many, many other things that you could do, because it really depends where those people are hanging out and likely to want to connect with you either socially that can move into something else or connect with you on a professional level. But in any case, whatever the right environment is for you, you need to be making meaningful relationships. It's not just about meeting a bunch of people. That's when I said paying into your network. It takes time. It's frankly, it's a pain in the ass sometimes. I mean, I have clients, I'm like, I didn't expect this was going to be so hard. Okay, well, if you do this right and you learn it right, it will never be so hard again. That's all I can say. Once you change your mindset about this, you know, even if you're 65 years old, you might, if you're healthy enough, want 2 or 3 more jobs. If you're 45, same thing. So you're learning these skills and building this network for the rest of your career and maybe beyond, because even when we retire, we might have things we want to do that require us to meet new people.
One last question would be, what is, in one sentence, what would be the key takeaway for everyone that's listened to your presentation today?
Why should I hire you? That's the key takeaway. Make sure that they understand. I'll go back up to that piece at the beginning. The bottom of this slide, matching what you offer to your audience.
Thank you. Thank you everyone that attended. Thank you so much, Anne Marie, for this very insightful and helpful presentation that offered us some concrete actions and very specific examples for how to address the ageism we might be facing in the workforce. For those who are attending, I would invite you back all month for our webinars for Career Month. We're having, I think we still have 11 more. Tomorrow we're having one on working with recruiting firms, the ins and outs of recruiting. And you can join us next Monday for a live resume review. So if you're looking at those job search tools and want someone to give you a 10-minute review of your resume, come back and join us next Monday. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care, everybody, and thank you again so much, Anne Marie.
Thank you.